Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. This week I'll be going into Week 15 of the NFL and predicting every winner and loser of each game, and then going into my top 10 power ranking list for the week. So without further ado, let's get into it. Up first on Thursday Night Football, we have a divisional game between the Chargers and the Raiders. Chargers are coming off a loss in which they also lost their quarterback for the season. Justin Herbert has a fractured finger, underwent surgery, and will miss the remainder of the season. Easton Stick will be their quarterback, who played all right in the last game. Not much more to be said about him. The Raiders, on the other hand, played a horrendous game. They lost 3-0 in one of the worst games. Definitely the worst game of the season. One of the worst games arguably in NFL history. Was a terrible game. The Raiders looked horrible on offense. Their defense actually looked pretty good, but their offense looked horrendous. Max Crosby on defense, though, has been a lot for opposing teams to deal with. And I do think this Raiders team is better than this Chargers team, although not by much. I think the loss of Justin Herbert will be enough, though, for the Chargers to lose, especially given their coaching situation is still Brandon Staley as their head coach, who is awful. Everybody expresses how terrible he is. So I'm going to pick the Raiders to win this game. Wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way, but I really don't think the Chargers are a good football team this year. Not that the Raiders are either, but I think they're better. Up next, we've got our first game on Saturday. Saturday noon game is Vikings versus Bengals. The Vikings, as I was just saying, played the Raiders, in a horrible game. They won by scoring 3 points. They benched Josh Dobbs in that game, who was playing terrible. Had an atrocious game against the Bears a couple weeks prior. And this week they are now starting Nick Mullins as their quarterback. Justin Jefferson did exit the game after his second catch last week due to an injury, rushed to the hospital. Everything's fine. He's expected to play this week, which will be a huge boost to that offense. The Bengals, on the other hand, coming off back-to-back wins over the Jaguars and Colts. Both teams have been pretty good all season, so pretty impressive wins. Browning, their quarterback, or their backup quarterback to Joe Burrow, who's out for season, has been playing amazing, especially for somebody of his caliber, a backup in a sense. He has been really good. And the Bengals offense is getting back into similar territories. Obviously, it's not the same without Joe Burrow, but similar territories as to where it was at its peak. I do think the Vikings are a much better team. The Bengals are a much better team than the Vikings. I'm going to pick the Bengals to win here. Up next, our afternoon Saturday game is the Colts versus the Steelers. The Colts coming off a loss to the Bengals. That receiving core has looked really good. Jonathan Taylor still out. Zach Moss should be getting the bulk of the carries as he has been while Jonathan Taylor has been missing time. The Steelers coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Patriots, who are one of the worst teams in the league. Their defense actually looked really not very good as they let up 3 touchdowns to the Patriots in the first half. They also have not had much of an offense. It really hurts them that they've been missing Kenny Pickett, although he hasn't even played that well when he has played. But it's Mitch Trubisky playing. I don't expect much from the Steelers. They just lost to the Cardinals and Patriots, 2 of the worst teams in the league, in back-to-back weeks. So I'm going to pick the Colts to win this one. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Broncos and the Lions. The Broncos coming off a divisional win over the Chargers in which Justin Herbert got hurt, so kind of invalidates that win in a little bit of a way. However, the Broncos still played that game really well and probably would have won that game whether Justin Herbert played or not. The Lions, on the other hand, just lost a matchup, and also divisional matchup, this time to the Chicago Bears, in which they've now been playing division rivals really close and have lost their 2 divisional matchups against the Bears and the Packers. the Lions have seemed to have struggled a lot more, especially on defense. Jared Goff has been throwing a lot more interceptions, been a lot more inconsistent, and I just have not had nearly as much hope for this Lions team in recent weeks as I previously had. I do think the Lions are a better team than the Broncos, but I think the Broncos will fight harder in this game and win. Up next, I've got a matchup between the Giants and the Saints. The Giants coming off a big win in primetime with Tommy DeVito at quarterback. He's actually played really well, had 0 interceptions in his last 3 starts, and has gotten 3 wins. So he's playing really well. That Giants defense is playing a lot better than they were at the beginning of the year. The O-line is improved a little bit. It's still not a good unit, but it's a lot better than the atrocity it was at the beginning of the season. The Saints, on the other hand, coming off a win over the Panthers, which really doesn't say very much as the Panthers are the worst team in football. The Saints are playing all their opponents really close, which is not good when they're winning, but it's at least they're playing close and not getting blown out in games that they're losing. But the Saints are not very good, nor are the Giants, but they are both in contention still for the playoffs, as the Giants are now 1 game back from being in contention, and the Saints are in one of the worst divisions in football, and therefore still have a chance to win their own division. Neither team is very good, but the Saints are a better team. That being said, I actually am going to pick the Giants in this one, as I do see them upsetting the Saints, but I would not be surprised if the Saints win, as they are probably favorited in this game. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Bears and the Browns. The Browns have been playing really well. Joe Flacco has been their quarterback, and they just beat the Jaguars after having lost the week before. Although Joe Flacco in both of his starts has played really well, he had over 300 yards and 3 passing touchdowns last week, which was the first time that a quarterback for the Browns had that in a very long time. The Bears, on the other hand, coming off a big divisional win over the Lions, in which they won by 2 scores. Their defense has improved immensely from the beginning of the season. Their offense seemingly is doing a lot better than it was against the Vikings a few weeks ago, as Justin Fields has been throwing touchdowns and looks a lot improved from where he was at the beginning of this season and in previous years. The Bears are a much improved team, but I do think this Browns defense is going to be too much for them to handle, so I'm going to pick the Browns to win this game. Up next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Falcons and the Panthers, and I'm not going to go too in-depth into this one. I basically always pick the team that is playing the Panthers to win, as the Panthers are the worst team in football. That being said, I would not be surprised as if it went in the Panthers' favor, as while they are the worst team in football, they tend to play their divisional matchups a little bit closer. That was evident a couple weeks ago when they played the Bucs, although it wasn't as clear last week when they played the Saints. But the Falcons are not that good of a team. The Panthers are just worse, so I am going to pick the Falcons, but I wouldn't be surprised if this game was close. But I'm never going to pick, as of now, it's really hard for me to pick the Panthers to win any games. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Buccaneers and the Packers. The Buccaneers are coming off a big divisional win over the Falcons, in which they were trailing and came back to win at the end. The Buccaneers are a relatively decent football team. Baker Mayfield is playing much improved from where he was last year. He has looked relatively competent as their quarterback. They've got good receiving weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Their defense has been playing relatively well, although they have a really bad pass defense. The Packers, on the other hand, losing to the Tommy DeVito-led Giants in primetime, really bad look, as they were en route to make the playoffs. They still are, but that loss definitely hurt them, especially given the Giants are as bad of a team as they have been all season. I do think that the Packers are a better team than the Buccaneers, but I think the Buccaneers are going to play the Packers really well, as the Buccaneers' defense can be a lot to handle, their pass rush can be really good, and they've got a lot of good offensive weapons, and the Packers have just been really inconsistent. Both teams have been, but I'm going to actually pick the Buccaneers to win this one. Up next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Jets and Dolphins. The Jets coming off a big win over the Texans in which they were tied 0-0 going into the second half and ended up winning by 30. In a game in which Zach Wilson threw for 300 yards. He looked really good, actually, after having been unbenched. That team looked much improved, but I don't think that will stay consistent, as Zach Wilson has had good games like this in the past and then reverts right back to being terrible the following week. So that doesn't give me too much confidence in this team. Dolphins, on the other hand, lost a heartbreaker to the Titans, in which they completely threw in primetime. They were up by 2 scores with less than 3 minutes left and still ended up losing the game. It was a really, really bad loss for them. I don't think it says too much about the Dolphins, but they do tend to lose a lot of games in December, and this was just yet another one of those. I do think they are a much better team than the Jets, so I'm still going to pick the Dolphins to win, but it is a divisional matchup, and Zach Wilson is coming off a good game, so I could see it going the other way, but the Dolphins should win. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Chiefs and the Patriots, and this is another game I don't think I need to dive too deep into, as the Patriots, yes, they won last week against the Steelers, and Bailey Zappi did look really good in the first half, but they still scored 0 points in the second half. Their offense is really bad still, although it looked much improved in that game. I don't see that lasting for very long. And the Chiefs, yes, they've had some issues, especially with receivers. Very unfortunate loss to the Bills, in which Kadarius Toney was offsides on a game-winning play that got the call reversed, and they ended up losing. But the Chiefs, even with all the receiving issues, even with having lost multiple games in the past couple weeks, are a much, much, much better team than the Patriots. This game shouldn't be close. Patrick Mahomes should be able to take down the Patriots, even with the Patriots having a good defense. Their offense, I don't think, is going to be good enough to keep up. Up next, we've got another divisional matchup, this time between the Texans and the Titans. The Texans coming off a really bad loss to the Jets, in which C.J. Stroud got hurt. He will not be playing this week. Nico Collins also got hurt. He might play this week, and they were without their other 2 top receiving weapons in tandem with Nico Collins, as Tank Dell is out for season and Dalton Schultz missed that game. Their defense has looked way better in past weeks, although last week really didn't show that, as the Jets were able to pass all over them with Zach Wilson at quarterback. The Titans, on the other hand, getting a really nice win over the Miami Dolphins in primetime. Will Levis looked really good in that game. He continues to show signs of improvement throughout the season. DeAndre Hopkins looked amazing. Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears looked like a really good tandem at running back. I would have the Texans winning this game if C.J. Stroud were going to be healthy for this game. But since it's Davis Mills starting at quarterback, and given how Derrick Henry tends to play against the Texans, I'm going to pick the Titans to win this game, as they tend to beat up on the Texans, especially in the ground game. Up next, we've got another divisional matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. And this is another game that doesn't really need much to be said about it, as the 49ers are one of the best teams in football and the Cardinals are one of the worst teams in football. The 49ers coming off a big win over a different divisional matchup in the Seattle Seahawks. The Cardinals coming off a bye week, in which the previous week they had actually beaten the Steelers, who have been a competitive team this year. So things are looking up for them, but the 49ers are a much, much, much better team than the Cardinals. 49ers are playing for they are currently the number 1 seed in the NFC and are playing to hold on to that. And the Cardinals are still playing, they're still in contention for the number 1 overall pick, although it's unlikely they get it. They are clearly one of the worst teams in football. 49ers should win pretty easily. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Rams. The Commanders coming off a bye week. Their defense has been just abysmal lately, ever since they made the trades to get rid of Montez Sweat and Chase Young. Their defense has really not performed. Sam Howell has continued to really perform really well, though, in what is basically his rookie season, as it's his first season with the starting job. He continues to play really well. The Rams, on the other hand, coming off a loss to the Ravens in overtime. The Ravens being one of the best teams in football, so it was a really impressive game for the Rams, although they did end up losing on a punt return touchdown in overtime. Really heartbreaking, but the Rams are a much better team than the Commanders. The Rams are in play for a playoff spot in the NFC, and I believe that they will continue with that push in this week, as they should beat the Commanders. Up next, we've got a really interesting matchup. What could be a really good game. All of the last 3 games this week should be really nice. We've got, on Sunday afternoon football, Cowboys taking on the Bills. The Cowboys coming off a massive win over the Eagles, in which they really blew them out. They now have control over the division and are second in the playoff race in seeding for the NFC as a whole. The Cowboys have continued to play lights out as Dak Prescott is continuing his MVP-like performance. CeeDee Lamb continues to be one of the best receivers in the entirety of football, and that defense continues to be really, really shut down as they were able to hold the Eagles to 0 offensive touchdowns and only 6 offensive points in the entire game. The Bills, on the other hand, coming off a big win over the Chiefs, in which they needed to win that game to keep their playoff hopes alive. That continues to be the case, and I think they're playing for enough here and are playing at such a high level ever since they fired their offensive coordinator a few weeks back, which a lot of fans said looked like a scapegoat move, but has actually proven a lot lately to seem to have improved that offense, especially in consistency. I am going to pick the Bills to win this game. Both teams are very good, and the Cowboys are playing at the level that is unlike almost any other team in the league, but I don't see that holding up against a really tough Bills defense, especially with the Bills playing for everything that they're playing for. Although I would not be surprised for this game to go in the Cowboys' favor, as the Cowboys have a very difficult schedule coming up and need all the wins where they can get them, but I'm going to still pick the Bills to win this game. Up next on Sunday Night Football, we've got a really nice matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars coming off back-to-back losses, 2 weeks ago losing to the Cincinnati Bengals, where Trevor Lawrence got hurt, Christian Kirk got hurt, and is likely to miss, and was put on IR and is going to miss multiple weeks. Trevor Lawrence wasn't expected to play against the Browns and ended up playing through a high ankle sprain, which was really, really impressive of him to be able to have played just a few days removed from that injury, which was supposed to sideline him for multiple weeks. That being said, their defense has been horrendous lately, as they've let up over 30 points in back-to-back weeks to the Bengals and the Browns. The Browns starting Joe Flacco, and the Bengals also starting a backup quarterback. Their defense has made these backup quarterbacks look really good in past weeks, and while their pass rush looks really good with Josh Allen leading the way, their pass defense has just been really bad. The Ravens are one of the best teams in football, if not the best team in the AFC at the very least. They played the Rams really close last week, only won in overtime off a punt return touchdown. But the Ravens are a better team than the Jaguars. They're less injured than the Jaguars, so they should get this win. But the Jaguars are a good football team. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a bounce-back game that they desperately need. But I'm still going to pick the Ravens to win this one. Up next, with our final matchup of the week on Monday Night Football, we've got a bird matchup between the Eagles and the Seahawks. The Seahawks coming off a loss to the 49ers, and the Eagles coming off also a divisional loss, this time to the Cowboys. The Eagles have now gotten blown out in back-to-back weeks by two of the NFC's best teams in the 49ers and the Cowboys. They've looked a lot worse and have seemingly not been able to hold up with their wins from early on in the season. They're now on to being the number 5 seed, as the Cowboys have that division, and so therefore they are in as a wild card right now. But that being said, the Eagles, especially after this week, should have a much easier remaining schedule and should be able to win some games. The Seahawks lost pretty big to the 49ers. Drew Lock was starting over Geno Smith, which definitely hurt their offense. But regardless, I don't think they would have stood much of a chance against that 49ers team. Again, I don't think they're going to stand too much of a chance here against the Eagles, but they did play the Cowboys really, really tight a few weeks back in what was a really good game. I'm hoping this game will be a shootout just like that one was, and I really wouldn't be surprised if this game goes pretty similar to that Cowboys-Seahawks game. That being said, I do think the Eagles are going to be playing this one a little bit tighter, especially given the fact that they're coming off big back-to-back losses. Don't think they're going to lose 3 in a row, so I'm going to pick the Eagles to win this one. But that being said, the Seahawks played really well against the Cowboys, who just beat the Eagles, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks were able to pull up an upset here and win this game. Looking at my Week 15 power rankings, at number 10, I've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have played relatively decent all season. They are currently in the lead of their division, have been winning most of their divisional matchups, and seem to be the best team in that division. Yeah, I don't know for sure if they're really a top 10 team in football, as you could really argue that a few teams deserve this spot over them, like the Colts, the Texans, and the Bengals. However, I'm choosing the Buccaneers to be in this spot as they currently have a playoff spot. I want one team to represent that division, and they seem to be the best team in that division as they win most of their divisional matchups. In at number 9, I've got the Rams. They've played really well all season. They're currently in a playoff spot or close to one. The only reason they lost last week was to an overtime punt return touchdown, and it was against one of the best teams in football in the Ravens. The Rams' offense has looked really good, really explosive, with a combination of Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Kyren Williams. And this offense is just in a much better spot than it was last year. This defense is much improved as well, especially with a couple of their rookies really performing well. And overall, this team should make the playoffs. In at number 8, I've got the Jacksonville Jaguars. They have dropped a decent amount, especially due to injury. They've lost their past 2 games. Trevor Lawrence is playing through injury. Christian Kirk is on IR. Their defense has really, really taken a step back in recent weeks. However, that being said, we've seen what they can be. We've seen that they are relatively consistently a good team in this league. Their defense was performing a lot better prior to the past 2 weeks, and once they're fully healthy, I do see this team making the playoffs and winning a few games in the playoffs. In at number 7, I've got the Kansas City Chiefs. They've had receiving issues all season, but their defense has really been able to lead this team to wins. Patrick Mahomes not having one of his better seasons, but I think a lot of that is based on how poor his weapons are around him. The Chiefs' defense has been lights out, though, and they were able to hold the Bills to a really close game. But that being said, I do have the Bills over them in at number 6, as the Bills don't seem to have as many problems as the Chiefs, or as many they just seem to play inconsistent football, as they look really incredible one week and then look really terrible the next. It's really hard to tell with this Bills team. However, in recent weeks, they've really seemed to have stepped it up, especially given the fact that they have their playoff hopes riding on every single game. And the Bills have looked much improved, especially since firing their offensive coordinator. And I do expect that improvement to continue and for them to possibly make a run for the playoffs. In at number 5, I've got the Miami Dolphins. They've looked amazing against most bad teams. They haven't looked nearly as good against teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles, who they've lost games to. But I think the most telling loss was their most recent one against the Titans, in which they threw a 2-score game with less than 3 minutes left in the game. Their offense can be really explosive, but the second Tyreek Hill goes out like he did in that Titans game, they look a lot worse. Their offense really isn't scoring much without him. He seems to be a majority of that offense, and so having that much rely on one player, especially a wide receiver, is a bit concerning. But their offense has so much potential with Hill, with Waddle, with their running back trio, that I just can't reasonably put them any lower, especially when their defense has taken steps up like it has since Jalen Ramsey has returned. In at number 4, I've got the Eagles. They've had two really, really bad losses in the past 2 weeks against two incredible opponents in the 49ers and the Cowboys. They are now down to number 5 in the NFC with a wild card spot. However, their record is tied for first in the conference with the 49ers and Cowboys. I do have them falling down to number 4 behind the Cowboys and 49ers as they had their asses handed to them by both of those teams. However, the Eagles are still a good football team. They will find a way to rebound from these 2 losses, and they're still going to make the playoffs, arguably still in contention for a bye week. So let's just see what happens from here on out. But the Eagles have definitely fallen off over the past few weeks. In at number 3, I've got the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys have played amazing football. Dak Prescott is on an MVP level. The only reason I can't put them any higher was because of how poor they were performing in certain games like the 49ers and Cardinals earlier on in the season. That being said, though, they seem to have rebounded heavily from that. They just are not ever a reliable team in the playoffs, as the Cowboys don't tend to make it very far. But they look like one of the best Cowboys teams in recent history, if not the best. And I'm excited to see how far this team can go, especially at the hands of Dak Prescott in the MVP conversation. In at number 2, I've got the Baltimore Ravens. Really tight game against the Rams last week, but they continue to be able to pull off wins no matter who their opponent is. They are definitely feeling the loss of Mark Andrews, but Isaiah Likely has been able to step up, and so has OBJ and Zay Flowers in that passing game. The passing game doesn't seem to have been missing too much of a step without Mark Andrews, but it definitely is a big loss that they suffered a few weeks ago. But the Lamar Jackson and the rest of the Ravens, offense and defense, are playing really, really good football. They continue to pull off wins, no matter how they are winning those games, and most of their wins tend to be pretty big. And in at number 1, I've got the 49ers. They have been winning games really big. They won against the Seahawks last week. They won massive against the Eagles the week before. Their offense and defense both seem to be one of the best in the league. Brock Purdy's in the MVP conversation, so is Christian McCaffrey. Their receiving trio of Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Deebo Samuel are all on pace for over 1,000 yards, which is really impressive from a receiving trio. Christian McCaffrey playing incredible football, had an amazing rushing performance last week, leads the league in rushing yards. And that defense continues to play electric with Nick Bosa, Chase Young as their pass rushers, and Fred Warner in at linebacker playing amazing football. They definitely are missing Talanoa Hufanga, who got injured a few weeks back and is out for season with a torn ACL at safety. But even with him missing, their defense is still performing at a high level. Their offense is performing at an even higher level, and they seem relatively unstoppable over the past few weeks. That's all I have for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll tune in with you guys next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.